to this debate. Today we're going to debate about the motion that says this house would replace human judgment with computer uh, al- allegor- sorry algorithms in a criminal sentence decision. First, as the first speaker of the proposition team, let me define the keywords of this motion. First, replace. Replace is to take the place of another thing, and computer algorithms is a group of logical steps to dissolve a problem, and criminal sentencing, the decision that give to punish a criminal. So now I'm going to talk about our main arguments in this debate. First, I will say that this decision, if we use computer algorithms, and give the decisions of any criminal sentencing, so this decision going to be enhanced. I'm going to be enhanced. Just sorry, but do you count the time? So, okay, this decision will enhance justice. And the second thing, and our second argument, is about, will this decision gonna enhance productivity, because we all believe that reports and computers are more productive and smarter than people. And the third thing that I'm going to talk about, the algorithms can never be affected by inside or outside effects like the people, and never pays or to something or someone, and no one can give it like bribes like money to change the right decision, and to be and the decision then gonna be fair, and at the same time gonna enhance justice. So I'm gonna explain all what I said, that and talk about the mechanism to make it clearer. So first, why do we want to replace human judgment with computer arguments? Easily, to enhance fair and justice, because people can be affected uh, based on their feelings, and because they are emotional like creations, and they can affected by their circumstances, by their mindset, and by their knowledge. And we all know that computer can, sorry, I will not take you, and we can't never say that people can be smarter than computers, or be more effective or more productive. And people can go based on their feelings, their circumstances, but computers never can do that. And the second thing that I'm going to talk about, that we're going to enhance and increase that productivity to working on judgment sentencing with less mistakes, because we all smarter and faster than people. So that's why we want to use algorithms, computer, to dissolve and to decide the decisions that that the criminal will punished or not. So I just want to say that we believe that injustice and fair, um, and how necessary and how important they are, and how our mechanism will enhance and will increase the fair and injustice in this case. So now let me just talk directly about our mechanism. First, we will create organization or teamwork just to make the algorithm system, and the system will be and the system will be supervision to the UN agency. And the other thing that we're going to talk about, we will teach the judgments how to deal with the algorithm systems, and how can they use computer, and how can they work in somehow perfect way. And the other thing that we will not take them out. We will not take people completely out of this process. No, the people will be here, will be working on this process. So they will just like put the inputs. So may you wondering about the inputs. What are the inputs that the people or the judges will put in the system? The the inputs
Go ahead.
will come from the investigation that the judge will do, and the law of the country. So there are people who will do this work, who will ask, and who will make the investigation, and the law of the the law of the criminal. And for example, the question that we're gonna make on the system is gonna be like the criminal plus the name of criminal and the law of the country, and the and this gonna we will have the like the this question will equalize that XYZ of decision, and this is gonna be
Right.
so fair. And the other thing that I want to talk about, sorry, is that decision never can be wrong if all the inputs are right. So the people who will put the inputs, I mean that the judgment who will put the input in the court, they will do that in the court in front of people, in front of the criminal's family, in front of the
Last
other
chance.
judges. And okay, go ahead.
Why have these algorithms and robots in generally been systematically banned in countries in Europe, for example, and not banned in countries like the United States?
Okay, so I said that this system gonna be created by an organization, and this organization will give the system to whole the world. So whole the world gonna work in that way. So we will not use a lot of like the judge's mind to find or the solution for any problem, or to decide any decision. So what I'm going to talk about here, the decision gonna give in front of people like the judges and the criminal's family, and the prosecutor, and the public prosecution will be the and that will be supervisor on all this process. So in that way we can just like guarantee that the process are fair, and the decision are natural, neutral, sorry. And that way we can save the judge's life, because we all know that there are a lot of judges who face a lot of difficulties in their life, and there are a lot of judges who were killed before because of their judgments. So that's why we want to use process just to enhance fair and justice. And thanks for listening, and I finished my speech.
Cool. Are the panelists ready? Cool. I thank the speaker for this very fine speech and call up the first opposition speaker to open the case for their side. Here.
Am I audible? Yeah, amazing. Computer algorithms subject people to algorithmic injustice. So proud to oppose in this motion a few things throughout my speech. First, on establishing the framework for my side of the House, then moving on to the rebuttal of the case of side proposition, and then to present two arguments. The first one on people beyond of punishment for an individual. And within this motion, because it says replace judges, then individual people cannot interfere within the sentencing process anymore, in spite of what proposition might want to tell you. We believe that the burden for this debate is twofold. The first one is that proposition has to prove that these algorithms holistically create fairer and better sentences for crime reduction. But the second level is that they have to prove to you that it is worth replacing humans completely for eternity. On opposition, we stand for human intervention in justice to ensure accuracy and fairness in sentencing. In addition, we support certain measures for human judges in order to maximize the fairness of the judicial system. This looks like funding judicial training and retraining, as the World Bank has done, or diversifying judging pools through constitutional amendments, as those that have been undergone in India, shortening contract terms, enforcing mechanisms for firing flawed judges, and things in that nature. But now let's talk about the case brought about by side proposition. First, on their model. They talk about the UN agency both creating and regulating these sorts of systems. The problem with this is I don't see how this is feasible when there are different legal systems around the world. So not only does this resolve to common law or civil law, but also the literally different countries having different laws. But the second thing that we would tell you is we don't think that the UN agency has necessarily the resources to do so. We believe that it is more likely for these types of machines to be created by third-party private actors, but more on that on our second argument. On their first argument, they talk about enhancing justice and how feelings interfere with the fulfillment of justice. In my argumentation, I will prove to you why a degree of emotionality is necessary to create these fair judgments. But what we would say is that these algorithms will emulate the decisions of a judge. And the way that they will do so is they will be trained by being fed past cases and past judge decisions. Insofar as judges in the past have been racist, have been sexist, and have had the bias that proposition characterize, these decisions are bound to emulate that. Their second argument on productivity, what we would say is that oftentimes we believe that time is necessary during sentences because there are many things that can change regarding the criminal, whether the criminal feels repent, whether he underwent certain types of rehabilitation, but more on that in my argumentation. And even if productivity was a benefit exclusive to their side, we would say we wouldn't jeopardize accuracy and fairness to gain productivity. That is where we stand. But now let's move on to my case. First argument on people beyond actions. The thesis of this argument is that when you automate sentencing, you jeopardize individualized justice, under which punishment is not only proportional to the crime, but responsive to the individual criminal. So where a verdict is black and white, guilty and not guilty, a sentence is many different shades of gray. People accused of the same crime can have different moral culpability, and this is determined through different factors, including external pressure to commit the crime, the actual desire to harm, regret or remorse felt from the crime, and even willingness and ability to improve as a citizen. This is a metric already used in the status quo. For example, in Italian courts, they have the option for shorter sentences for murder convicts if they endured physical and mental abuse during their lifetime and show regret and reformation. Overall, the type and duration of punishment derives from the person beyond just the crime that was committed. Why are algorithms then structurally unable to do this? Two reasons. First, because algorithms are fed cases which they group based on similar characteristics. So when you run a new case through it, it is compared to these groups and outcomes are bound to be equal for cases who are like at a characteristic level the same, but committed by radically different people. But the second reason is that the metric used to identify these contextual factors that separate different criminals from each other is intrinsically human, based on emotional reactions to the case and even instinct or intuition. You can't program regret or hatred in a criminal's eyes or social pressure from a gang-ridden neighborhood. A machine can empathize with a single mother of 3 who committed larceny as it only sees her age, her race, and her criminal background. In a nutshell, programs work in rigid operations, but they don't understand the meaning behind these operations and can't react to this. Two reasons why you should care about individualized justice. First, because sentencing places life, liberty, and property at risk, which are rights that we are born with and entitled to and give us pleasure. Specific sentences make sure that the withdrawal of these rights is accurate to the punishment, and so the punitive role of the system is limited to where it's needed. But the second reason is that people that historically have been disproportionately affected by law enforcement are at risk of going from over-policing to over-sentencing because of how they are defined in the statistics. This looks like how Compass, a widely used algorithm in the United States, is twice as likely to flag Black defendants as future criminals as it is to falsely flag white defendants. Why does this argument matter? We don't think human sentencing is perfect, but in a world where you have good judges and bad judges, humans at least have the ability and the potential of thorough and individualized judgment, while algorithms are unable to do so. Before I move on to my second argument, I'd love to take a point from Team Libya if they have one. Okay, moving on to my second argument on judges and communities. Judges can and should transcend jurisprudence and have effects over the community they preside over. Two lines on this. The first one is that sentencing is often a process of reparations for victims to finally get closure. Two ways that this happens. The first one is that victims provide testimony after the verdict to explain their experience and the pain that they underwent. Judges, as authority figures within a community and symbols of power, then validate the position of the victim. This changes the power dynamics between the victim and the perpetrator of the crime. This looks like how in Pitkin County in Colorado, two teenage victims spoke during hearings of two young men for criminal assault. Statements led to one of the offenders getting a sex offender registry. The second way that this happens is when victims confront the aggressor during sentencing hearings as their contribution to the punishment. Judges here are important mediators to make sure that victims are satisfied and the situation doesn't go out of hand. When sentencing is automated, this process no longer occurs. By participating in the sentencing process, then, a judge that overpowers the perpetrator, victims of rape or kidnap can gain the reparations that they need. Secondly, jurisprudence is not a stagnant role, but rather one that adapts to a changing social reality, whereas algorithms only operate within the framework of the information that they have and just apply the law. When a change is necessary, there are two alternatives for algorithms. The first one is that machines are removed and people awaiting sentencing are stuck in limbo, often behind bars. And the second is that machines remain in place. We think this is unjust for those being sentenced to arbitrarily be recipients of bad sentences. Judges can be directly responsive to the situation at hand as they are directly confronted with novel cases. What is the impact of this? We believe that overall, we get more trust in the judicial system, where people view judges as guides rather than jailers. Importantly, when you have more trust, then you have more people contributing to the system, and you can gain the efficiency that proposition talks about. We think there is no greater injustice than the equal treatment of unequals we are so proud to oppose.
Are the panelists ready? Is ready. I see. Predrag, are you ready? Cool. So in that case, I believe. Okay, cool. I thank the speaker for this very fine speech. I almost forgot that. And I'd like to call up the second opposition speaker to continue the case. Proposition speaker to continue the case for their side. Here.
Can you hear me properly? Okay. To say that the legal system in many countries around the world are inefficient would be an understatement. Overcrowded prisons, backlogged courts, and overburdened public defenders are just some of the many pressing issues currently facing the legal field. And not to forget that the liberal democracies long have struggled to minimize or eliminate elements of bias in their systems of criminal justice. It just proves how difficult it is for humans alone to administer justice alone. And it is in this context that we are so very proud to propose today's motion. As the first speaker earlier said, that we are in this case taking into account how to enhance justice as a priority. And I will also be refuting some of the other team's point in during my argument. So let's ask ourselves a question. How is it by using computer algorithms are we enhancing justice and productivity into the society? Well, the answer is that is quite simple actually, and I will elaborate. Professionals in the criminal justice system have a seemingly impossible task. They must weigh the probability that the criminal defendant will show up to trial, whether they are guilty, and what the sentence should be. And these decisions require immense wisdom and analytical powers and even handedness to get right. And not to forget that the ruling handed down will change the course of individuals' life permanently, which is a huge responsibility that has proven to be tedious and tiresome and most likely to be performed inefficiently by those judges. And more often than not, human judgment brings human failings. Not only are there racial disparities in the sentencing process, but research suggests that factors like how recently a parole board member ate lunch or how the local college football team is doing can have a significant effect on the outcome of the decisions. So let's think here logically and truly through this. It may just be that tasks we ask judges, I will take you later, tasks that we ask judges and parole boards to carry out are simply too difficult for humans to do alone. While humans rely inherently on biased personal experience to guide their judgment, this technology doesn't. Of course, it's understandable to think that, still think that these algorithms can't be imperfect sometimes, but that's most likely is not the case in here because, as mentioned by our first speaker, we are producing high quality. We are offering high quality algorithms where they adhere to key principles such as respect of the human rights and non-discrimination. The inputs in these algorithms are to be supervised by professionals and judges to make sure that there would be no biased input, which will make the process much more safer for these people and will therefore enhance the fairness and the justice in the system. So in this way, we ensure a high rate of fairness and justice in cases. We also believe, as I earlier mentioned, that it is highly productive because of the computer's ability to process large volumes of information. Although the capacity for computers to collect and store information has grown, the ability for human to efficiently process the information has remained stagnant. Analyzing criminal justice information often requires specialized human resources that are limited in the availability. Furthermore, examining this information it can be extremely tedious when done manually. People are subject to exhaustion, which leads to errors. For example, in Hainan High Court in China, they are making a full use of this technology to help judges in handling cases. And with the help of that system, it has reduced the judgment time in Hainan province by more than 50%. And the time it takes to formulate a written judgment and all legal procedure documents has been reduced by almost 17 and 19% as reported. And it was also proven that this technology reduce human error factors. The results are objective, swift, transparent, and verifiable. This technology can also empower the court system to meet responsibility. Sure, go on.
Why is automating sentencing the only way to mitigate errors of judges when we give you 5 mechanisms in our first on how we would reform this system?
I did not quite hear that.
Why is automating sentencing the only way to mitigate the error of judges?
Well, given the circumstances, given the legal field that we are currently facing in here, we can see that the usual and the usual procedure of automating judges is not working. And as we are debating here today, we are talking about the possibility that these computer algorithms are the future. So it's not possible. It's not possible to be automated by judges. So as I was saying, it was proven that these technologies reduce human error factors. The results are objective, swift, transparent, and verifiable. This technology can empower the core system to meet the responsibility, therefore increasing the accountability that will be faced by the people and raising the approval rate of these people. At the time when most of them are forced with staff shortage and economic pressure, thus making our model more efficient because it enhances justice and productivity. And thank you a lot for listening.
Are the panelists ready? Good, good. So, in that case, I thank the speaker for this very fine speech and call up the second opposition speaker to continue the case for their side. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Perfect. Just give me one second. Cool. Panel, the question in this debate is not only whether you're convinced that robots or humans create better sentences, but it is a question about whether or not you're going to accept creating a decision that has an echo in reality, that has an echo in eternity. It is literally taking out the certain benefits that they recognize and concede from judges, the closure for victims. It is literally telling the most vulnerable in society, the racism that has gone against you for the rest of your life will be institutionalized. These are weapons of math destruction. We think the mathematics in them should be explained by side proposition. We think when the inputs are wrong, the problems are bad for these individuals. I want to give 2 points of clash before I go into a third argument for today's debate, where I'll talk about where it is more likely that these products come from independently of the mechanism on the United Nations. I want to give 4 responses to the mechanism that, by the way, they have dropped in the last speech. The first answer that I want to give is that this is a very subjective actor for the debate, which is to say we don't really understand why they choose the United Nations, specifically when the UN has no jurisdiction over the laws of different countries. That's to say, the understanding that you have to have of the United Nations is that it is a tool for international diplomacy, for international issues, but it doesn't have the particular purpose of entering into the laws of particular countries. We think it is more likely than not that countries are less likely to trust institutions like this when they literally are creating the laws, the inputs, the things that affect people right there in their countries. We think the second thing to say is the United Nations doesn't really have like an aspect of it which is in charge of doing these things. So if side proposition has the capital of literally creating a new part of one of the biggest organizations to basically regulate, distribute, and having to program these types of things, we think we have the fiat for 2 things on our side. First of all, it's for massive retraining of judges, for the types of policies that Mariana talks to you about in first up. I think that if they want to claim that the major organism is now going to be present in all countries in the world through standardizing these laws, we can secondly claim that on our side it is more likely for us to have processes where it is more likely to give resources to these types of programs, even by the international institutions that they talk about. Second response that I want to talk about is that there is a standardization process. We really don't understand how the mechanism by prop would work, but let's imagine that it works in 2 different ways and attack those different possibilities. The first possibility is that they really do change inputs and really change the characteristics depending on the country. I think if that's the case, considering that their case is contingent on having constant programming, basically having checks and balances on these robots, it is very hard to do when every single country and every single local court has to contact the United Nations. The second thing is, even if they have the same inputs and basically like you just have to change holistically, then we think that that is a massive problem, specifically for what Mariana tells you in first, where context is very important for the scenarios. Lastly, I think just the United Nations in many instances is a biased organization that doesn't necessarily understand the nuances in certain countries. We just don't think this is the best. I want to go into the first point of clash so far in this debate on the point of fairness. Let's be very clear that side proposition cannot just program everything in the debate. They have to concede that systematically, the reason for a country such as France, the reason for why such countries such as England has banned these types of technologies is because they recognize that right now, these are not working. And I think there are 4 issues on fairness that we have to consider. The first is the issue on individualization. We hear no response to a significant part of our first argument, where we explain to you that the reason for it is important is because as humans, we do think that fairness relies on the capability for you to feel like you're being being treated by more than the action that you are committing. I would even extend this argument to say, the fact of the matter is these types of technologies only consider how likely it is that you commit a crime again. And the types of information that you put in these machines is, for example, where you were born, who are you related by, what is the past of your family. These are all things that end up just recriminalizing people who are from low-income backgrounds, Black people in the US, indigenous people in Mexico. These are the types of things that we regret. And even though side proposition says the United Nations would solve this, or we would program this, we think when that information is biased and when the inputs are problematic, that would not happen. The second issue that we talk on fairness is the issue of accountability. And I want to engage with the direct material that Prop 2 brings. I think it's more likely for you to be able to punish unfair judges, judges who were bribed, judges who were bought, judges who in many cases are not effective on our side of the house. Note that on their side, you can have two problems. Either companies who produce this and sell it to the UN, for example, can have certain processes and incentives of, for example, having certain inputs so that it is bought the most on a competitive market of these products. But second of all, and most importantly, I think the most realistic answer is that you have a lot of checks and balances in the current system, right? You can just retrain judges, change judges, put judges in certain processes if they commit mistakes. I think there is a variety of things that they have to engage with. Last thing in here is on this issue of closure. I think they have to engage with their second argument, where we say just by the fact that judges can contextualize through empathy, through human judgment, that these individuals were wrongly mistrialed, or for example, that the system was bad to them, and that person is therefore ought a certain moral responsibility. That, for example, we are not to put them in jail for the rest of their lives because the type of crime that they committed was justified under the circumstances that they were in, and I think is more important. The fact that you can now see that that person is heavily affected by the murder of their family, by the rapist, is not the same as just about a case of molesting. The second point that I want to talk about is on effectivity, which is really quick. The first thing is they say judges are quite volatile. I think we have two responses. The first is, of course, you can have the several mechanisms that we talk on op one, but I think even if it is true that these judges have several issues, they have to engage with the judges that are really good, right? Those who are not affected when they're hungry, those judges we think are the majority of ones who go through years of training, who are very much capable of doing so. The question in this debate is whether is not only who do you think is better, whether these machines or these humans, but what happens and why is it morally justifiable to replace the judges who right now are successful. Last thing, they say we say that it is very hard to program. The first thing to note here is that these incentives of companies still exist. And specifically in many instances, it is hard to program because these machines are black boxes, because the companies who create them don't really in many instances understand how the decision got to the way it did. Insofar as side proposition doesn't really prove to you that, then I think there is a problem. Before I move into third argument, yes.
Can you just guarantee that judge will not decide based on their feelings, or they will not make any mistake?
Thank you. Two responses. The first is we have given you two arguments on why even in the instances in which feelings have something to do, that is positive for in many instances where feelings are necessary. But second of all, I think we can regulate that because literally they have to work under the law and there are ways of punishing them in the case in which they're not doing so. I want to talk about a third argument. We tell you that automating sentencing impedes open justice by adding barriers to transparency. The first line of analysis is on accessibility, where we know that algorithms are difficult to understand. And even if inputs and outputs are clear, the cascade of layers of code in between make the process extremely obscure. Note that the more advanced and thorough these are, the harder they are to be understood. And this directly violates the judicial process because decision makers no longer expose their reasoning. So individuals lose the ability to hold the system accountable, specifically when now you have to appeal to the United Nations. We think that the comparative is where in the status quo, judges have to give reasoning over their decision. And if they are biased, it is easy for everyone to understand and challenge that and hold them accountable to answering the POI. On their side, we think it is very hard to do so because if you don't understand the code, you can't really appeal to these sentences. The second line of analysis here is on the providers. We think that the technological infrastructure behind these algorithms can only be developed by third-party providers. That's why you don't see governments developing this all throughout the world. We think the most likely provider are big tech companies, such as in Silicon Valley, and they will work on two incentives. The first is on gaining profits, and the second is on mining data. We think that tech giants, such as IBM and Intel, through a firm called Equivent, develop technology for a widely used algorithmic tool. And either way, this will become a competitive market which generates the incentives of creating quick, cheap, and secretive products. The second argument that Prop brings might be true that it is faster, but that is not necessarily better. For example, Northpoint Compass, which is one of the most used in the United States, was using an incentives and putting more people in jail than they should, just because that was more profitable for them, because they were having more possibilities of entering into a system that in the United States wanted for more people to go into jail. We think there are no checks and balances, and this gets worse because people usually consider privacy breaches as inherent or natural to economic practices that come with technology. We would hold people to those standards. We think the government should not trigger these people, and just institutional racism we are so proud to oppose.
Cool. I thank the speaker for this fine speech. Are the panelists ready? Cool. In that case, I would like to call up the third proposition speaker to continue the case for this side. Here.
Excuse me, before I start, I don't think my internet connection is strong enough for me to open the video.
Yeah, in that case, don't worry. You're very audible and you can start your speech whenever.
Okay. I'm ready to start. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this debate. I am the third speaker of the proposition team. Before I start, I want to reboot a few claims the opposition team has said. Well, why are we doing these computers instead of leaving judges? Well, like we said, feelings and outside and inside effects affect judges. It doesn't depend on how many years they trained or how much experience they have. Feelings are something natural in a human being. So we can't control that. We can't say that, oh, I've been like doing training law for 30 years, I'm not going to be affected by anything or by this case or by that. So that's why computers, we input the computers with the right claims and the right the case, and we write the case down, and it will be supervised by specific people that know the law, and each system of this computer will be depending on will depend on each country depending on its law. Another thing that was said, the moral of why they did the crime. Okay, so if the judge isn't, wait, I'm sorry, made a mistake. You said that if we didn't say that we are going to be replacing humans completely. That's not even possible. There has to be a human factor behind everything in this world. I mean, we can't do that. So, but it's not going to be one person that's like, I'm sorry, that it's not going to be just by one person that doesn't know what they're doing. No, it's going to be by specific UN agencies. And like I said, every system will be depending on the law of the country. Okay, individual rights. That's not, the system's already corrupt. Okay, most judges are racist, biased, and everything. The system's already corrupt. No, how could you say? No, I'm sorry. How could you say that you're going to punish unfair judges? That's not happening right now. I mean, look at reality. It's not happening. Racists and people are still going to jail, and they didn't even commit the crime itself. At least the computer, the algorithm doesn't compare between a white person or a black person. It's not racist. We have to ensure that, we have to ensure that whatever the input is in, it's depending on the cases and the name and everything. It's gonna be in front of people, neutral input. So everybody has a say in it. Years of training, like I said. Okay, then what my team we want, the world that we built. The world that we built with this computer algorithm, that it doesn't, number one, it doesn't get affected by outside and inside. It's our system will be super good and fair, and nothing will be affected on it. It's not a human being. It doesn't have emotions that could be affected by anything or anyone. And the computer abilities, now technology is really good these days in the 21st century. So the errors would be at least will be at least low, and it will less likely to be, for errors to happen. It also reduces times of cases. Some cases take years to judge, years to in the process and everything. But with this computer, it takes it's not a few seconds, a few minutes, and it would save a lot of time. Plus, it will save a lot of lives, especially for judges, because some people give responsibility on the outcome. I'm sorry. They give the responsibility to the judge, and the judge can be in danger. It can he or she can be blackmailed or kidnapped, or his family's not going to be in danger. So how could you guys say that leaving humans will do that?
QI.
Here you go.
A widely used algorithm in the United States was developed for 22 years, and then it was changed 3 times, programmed 3 times more throughout 6 years, and it continued to do the exact same mistakes. Why would the United Nations specifically do something different, or why is programming as easy as you make it seem in your side?
Well, it depends. See, what we said, that everything is going to be dependent on each country. So hacking, of course, is going to happen, but it's easy. We could just leave this. If this computer was hacked or changed, we could just leave it and go to another computer. Also, I would like to say that the whole system with this, the whole system can change and develop and make it better. And we want justice as much as everybody else does. So with all this, we want to get a fair and closest to right decisions out of these computers. And as a proposition side, we propose this motion. Thank you.
Cool. I thank the speaker for this fine speech. Could I ask the panelists if they're ready? Cool. So in that case, I would like to call up the third opposition speaker to close the case, as I said here.
Okay, just 1 second. In Proposition's best case scenario, you have a system built around mitigation of errors, rather than one built to judge people in the most fair and accurate way. 2 main points of clash throughout my speech. First of all, individualized versus standardized justice, and second of all, mitigation of mistakes. Now, on the first point of clash. So this basically clashes their argument on how the bias that exists in society. And I think there has been a misunderstanding of how bias plays out in both ways. We see that ultimately when using AI, bias will become way worse. Why? The algorithms will be ultimately use past data to be able to make their decision, meaning the past data that has already been biased because the system has convicted people on biased ways, is just going to be replicated into the machine, or even worse. We bring you this statistic that, for example, when Compass was used, we see that no bail release to white defendants became much more likely, and the sentences for black defendants became higher because the algorithm saw that they believed basically that black defendants were would make the crime again, meaning that they would be more likely to make the crime again, ultimately putting their sentences higher.
However, we see that this bias is just made ultimately worse. However, as I will also touch upon the second point of clash, for humans, you're able to have more accountability. But now this clashes basically with our first argument, where we tell you that ultimately, sometimes this people are accused of the same crime have different moral culpability. And this touches upon the point of bias, because the contextualization of each different human being is very important. And ultimately, the context of each case is also important. When you're using a standardized way of justice, which is basically what team proposition stands for, it means that you're going to apply the same way for every different case, even if you're adapting it to the laws of that certain country. However, each case will have different standards and will have different circumstances in which the sentence should be higher or lower, meaning that you have to adapt to the specific. We give you the example of a group of Italy, how they have how if these criminals have shown regret, they're also able to have shorter sentences, meaning that there's a possibility of them to be reintegrated with society. However, the AI cannot understand this. Algorithms are not capable to understand the regret of a human has, and are not capable to understand the context behind a certain crime of the criminal. When you're teaching all of the crimes just the same, you're not actually achieving a fair system. And ultimately, they're more likely to have bias on their side. However, then they move on to their first argument, which is basically that feelings are something natural to human beings, and that this is problematic. And even though we do agree that, for example, in the current status quo, there can be certain subjectivity, and taking to the extent of this, first of all, I would just like to re-clarify our framework that we do stand for different methods of being able to decrease this bias that exists in society. For example, continue funding judicial training and retraining, for example, just as the World Bank has done for decades, diversifying judging pools, shortening contract terms, and enforcing mechanisms that are for consistently flawed judges. We do believe that the system does have problems. However, they have to prove why specifically it's able, why it's morally justifiable to replace the good judges as well. But now on the point how feelings are natural. This basically clashes with our second argument, where we tell you that feelings, once again, can actually be useful, not only to understanding the contextualization, but for the victims of the closure. Victims also deserve the justice that in the justice system, and they are one of the agents that we should consider. Our second argument basically touches upon, for example, in cases of sexual assault, when the victims do stand up and tell their testimonies to the judges, they're more likely, all of these criminals maybe are going to have a higher sentence due to this. This is incredibly important in order to have a fair system. I'll take your point of information. No? Okay, cool.
Okay, don't you think that the AI can understand more than people and can understand millions and millions of data?
Do I understand your point? Even though even if we grant you the point that AI can process things more quickly, this is not meaning that it's going to fully. Just because it can understand the different statistical ways, it doesn't understand the context of the crime, which is incredibly important when looking at fair sentences. So they also claim that they're not going to replace, and basically conceding that humans are necessary for this process. However, the motion does state that they have to replace these completely, meaning that they have to prove once again why it's morally justifiable to replace this in principle, and even in our best case scenario. But now moving on to our second point of clash, which is the mitigation of mistakes. Now, basically, we tell you that the reason why we know that many of judges are biased, and the reason why team proposition stands up and tells you how unfair the system is because humans can basically understand where these biases come from. We can understand that these biases come from an institutionalized racism that exists in society, for example, or even and we can basically understand the process that goes behind this. However, when a black box is taking these decisions, and when there is bias, there's no way to tell you, to know. This is basically shown in our third argument. However, we see that the possibility on our side for checks and balances and regulation is way more likely. Just because of the fact that we're able to see that this racism comes from someplace, is that we're able to take away these judges and to prove and to mitigate more of these mistakes. There are several cases that, for example, judges are more likely to receive media attention when there are errors. When a machine is biased, there is no way of knowing why, meaning that the society in itself won't perceive it that way. Now, just quickly addressing their point on that they say that the judges are endangered in society. However, because you're only considering sentencing, this case really still stands because it's still like they still have conviction, meaning that judges can still be endangered. Just a quick thing on that point. But now I'm continuing on with our third argument. We tell you how trust is lost when it's a black box, and trust is one of the essential elements in the justice system. Black box means that there's less checks and balances through the justice system. They also prove this point by saying that hacking can happen. And even though we didn't bring this point, we believe that this is a mischaracterization, because they say that hacking can happen, but we can simply replace the computers. However, we have already told you that that an algorithm like this can take up to 20 years to program, and it's not easy to change, meaning the way that society develops is not going to be adaptable for these AI systems in the first place. And now moving on to the point of efficiency. So they basically say that the system is more efficient and thus it should be implemented. However, even if we grant you the point of efficiency, first of all, we believe that efficiency should not be the priority when accuracy is not taking place. And second of all, we see that all of this, ultimately the justice system is also slow, not only because of sentencing, but rather because of all the different steps they're taking in a point. We see that the conviction is still a large part of time that judges have to deal with. And because you're only putting AIs for sentencing, this point isn't really mitigated on your side either. Ultimately, we see that even if AIs were to be efficient and they operate just like computers and productive, this is exactly the problem. Humans and judges were put in for a first place because it isn't only about saying whether they committed the act or not, but rather the extent of their conviction and the extent about receiving a fair trial. This is not only about the justice for the criminals in itself, but the justice for victim. When you stand for an algorithm system, you're standing for a system that will treat everyone equal, even when they are unequal in the eyes of society. Thank you.
Are the panelists ready? Cool. We thank all the speakers, and we're now going to move to the reply speakers, starting off with the opposition reply speaker. Here.
Cool. Am I audible?
Yeah.
The difference between a racist judge and a racist machine is that while side proposition recognizes that as a society, we can know when a judge is racist, we cannot understand idealist math, idealist algorithms. We are so proud to stand on the team that would not program the most dangerous and the most horrible problems in our societies. I want to give 4 points before into my 2 points of clash to just clear out how proposition has strategically lost this debate from the first moment. The first problem that they make is that they don't really engage with the motion, right? They just don't replace these humans, which I just think from the get-go loses them the debate, since that's what we were asked to debate. If you're still going to have humans in some capacity, which they don't really explain, then I think they are losing the debate. We conceded you can have humans to program them, but they continue to say that they would not replace them in the decision. So they lose the debate from the get-go. The second problem is they dropped their own mechanism, right? They don't really told us why the United Nations was going to be a good actor, even when we gave you 7 responses down the bench, why we think it is a biased actor, why we think it is an actor that would be overburdened, why we think now it would appeals and the connection between local processes, local judges, local courts, and the United Nations would be very inefficient, etc. The third problem is that they conceded most of our material, right? They don't really tell us why is it likely for a judge not to be like just regulated on our side. We conceded that there were certain problems, and I think the fourth and biggest problem with side prop is that at best they prove to you that judges have certain issues, but they don't give you structural analysis on why this is intrinsic to all judges, right? Some judges might be hungry and bad. We think that can be easily checked, but we think for the overwhelming majority of people who don't decide on whether they're hungry or not, we win the debate. I want to talk about 2 points of clash. First, on the principal justification. Second, on effectivity. Since first up, we were very clear on how important individualized trials and individualized sentences are. That's to say, individuals who are rehabilitated, for example, who are treated unfairly, we think these people are now institutionalized in a way manner. The problem particularly is that now you are compared to a system and the subjective background that you are coming from. These individuals are not just part of a process of whether or not you deserve that sentence, but how likely are these people to go back and commit a crime. When these people are Black, when these people are from poor neighborhoods, the inputs that you put will say this person is more likely to commit a crime. Independently of who you are now not an individual, you're just part of a system that subjectively was imposed on you. The second point, major point that we gave in here was on testimonies and empathy. We gave you a whole constructive and first off on how it is very important for these people to have closure, to be able to speak up, because that way a judge can contextualize on how important it is to give a specific sentence or not. We think it is not the same for you to murder a person randomly on the street than to murder the person who was about to kill your family. We think those were very important nuances that a machine can understand. And the testimonies and the closure has a principal point that should be very important. The second point is on effectivity and how fast these machines can go. We flipped that argument against them. And we said, if these machines can be very fast, that means you have less checks and balances because of how fast the product is, how it is very unlikely for you to appeal. On the second point, which is also very important, I think, is that if it is so fast, then it is very unlikely for them to be able to program it as they say. Last 2 points, we talked about how this programmed racism just have the same problems as IPRO. I think the distinct difference is that we gave you analysis on why it is worse when the majority of society idealizes machines, where now the system can say, it was not my fault, it was the fault of the United Nations, it was the fault of the programmers, it was the fault of the companies. We think that is very important, and in principle, you should hold the system accountable. We think when you can't even create an appeal, that is unlikely to happen. Last important point, we say that if we fail, we have a couple of things that can happen on both sides, and this comparative is, I think, the most important in the debate. Inside proposition, what they say is if they are flawed, they basically will program it, but we don't think that is possible. We gave you 3 reasons why this wasn't the case. In many cases, because we just don't understand how the decisions happened. 2, because they don't have the incentives because companies have certain purposes of maintaining the secrets. And 3rd, because in many cases, the communication is very hard, for specifically if you have to communicate with the UN. On our side, we gave you several mechanisms of why even the worst judges can be held accountable, can be changed. If they fail, they would just put worse machines. We are proud to oppose because we don't institutionalize what we most regret. We are very proud to be in Mexico.
Are the panelists ready? I would like to thank the speaker for this very fine reply speech. And before that next speech, let me just remind people that mute yourselves when you're not speaking, ideally, because it can often disrupt the speeches of others, although that should not be relevant for more than a speech. So in that case, I would like to call up the proposition reply speaker to close the case for their side and indeed the debate as a whole. Here.
May I do my reply speech through microphone only, because I don't think my internet connection allows me to do a video without it lagging.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
We strongly believe that we brought clarity to today's status quo by proving to you how, by using computer algorithms, we are enhancing justice in the legal field and also enhancing productivity through 3 main key points that we made. So first, we established that by using computer algorithms, we are eliminating most of the risk of the unjust sentencing, whether it was biased or simply made by a judge who had a bad day because his favorite football team has lost today. Because we are producing high-quality algorithms that were programmed to understand and comprehend human rights and do not discriminate. So thus, decreasing the amount of unjust in the legal field, which will have a great impact on our quality of life. We also prove to you that by using this technology, it ensures more productivity, which is a good thing regardless of how the productivity, and makes it makes the justice procedure more faster, which is a good thing regardless of how the opposition were claiming. In that us. In the US only, we also proven to you that by giving these algorithms the main responsibility, we are eliminating most of the dangerous that accompanies the judge's job in their lives from possible retaliation hits, therefore making the society more safe. We also said that our mechanism, the UN Office for Drug and Crime will be providing the appropriate technical support that is needed to every country to then apply their own different rules and regulations to work with what we believe. When the opposition claimed that we can know if a judge is racist or biased, but we can know we can't know that with an algorithm. I think we have proven enough times that a machine is not racist. It does not know the difference between people like human, nor does it discriminate, because it depends on the input, and we have made sure that to establish that this input will have to be safe and would have to be supervised by people who are understandable and will do it in the right way. And for the hacking point, we prove to you that every system has its flaws, but the possibility of a high quality proceeded algorithm made and protected by the state as much as possible is unlikely to be hacked. Or the possibility is it to be hacked is much less than the possibility of a human judge to be bribed. For that reason, we believe that we brought sense to, for instance, we brought sense to and clarity to the status quo, and we believe that we won this debate. Thank you all for listening.
Cool. I would like to thank the speaker for this fine speech, and indeed everyone for what was a really interesting debate. You can start socializing and doing virtual handshakes and stuff. In a bit, we're going to leave to deliberate and get back to you as soon as we can with a call and a reason for decision.
Thank you, team.
Year after year, the World Schools Debating Championship gathers the best debaters from around the globe. This year's pandemic made that impossible, so we took it online. In this style of debate, there are two teams. The proposition team, which is in favor of the motion, and the opposition team, which is against it. Each side features 3 speakers giving 4 speeches. The first 2 speakers generally present constructive argumentation. The third primarily focuses on refutation, while the reply speaker summarizes the debate. For the prepared rounds, teams research the motions for weeks in advance.